Why intuitive introverts suffer the most. Carl Jung's hidden truth. There's a strange paradox that exists quietly in the background of society, something few people ever talk about, and even fewer understand. It's the silent suffering of the intuitive introvert. Not just the shy, not just the quiet or socially anxious, but those rare individuals who possess both deep internal sensitivity and a powerful intuitive sense of the world around them. Carl Jung called them the introverted intuitives, the rarest of his psychological types. And maybe you are one of them. Maybe you've always felt like you saw things others didn't, felt things before they happened, or carried a kind of existential weight that no one else seemed to notice. And maybe you've also felt completely alone in it. This suffering doesn't come from external rejection alone, though that happens too. It comes from a deeper fracture between the intuitive introvert's inner truth and the outer world's indifference to it. Because let's be honest, most of the world is built for the external, the obvious, the measurable. Productivity, entertainment, competition, status, these are the currencies of society. And when you walk into that world carrying dreams, visions, or subtle insights, you're not met with curiosity. You're met with confusion or worse, silence. Why are you so intense? You think too much. Lighten up. And over time, that feedback becomes a quiet prison. You start to question not just your place in the world, but your perception of it. You wonder, is something wrong with me, or is something wrong with everything else?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's go deeper. Carl Jung believed that the intuitive introvert is someone whose dominant function is introverted intuition. That means they don't just think abstractly, they live in abstraction. Their minds are constantly scanning for patterns, hidden meanings, deeper truths. But unlike the extroverted intuitive, who externalizes their visions through experimentation and action, the introverted intuitive turns inward. They dwell in a symbolic, often dreamlike inner world. They don't just ask what happened. They ask, what does it mean? And that question can be both a gift and a curse. Because here's where the suffering begins. When you see too deeply into a world that doesn't want to look, you notice the cracks in conversations. You feel the tension no one names. You sense the emotional undercurrents that others avoid. You predict outcomes before they unfold, and you carry the weight of those revelations often in silence. Not because you want to be silent, but because you've learned, again and again, that speaking your truth is like whispering into a storm. People don't hear you. Or worse, they hear you, but they don't get it. And isn't that the most painful kind of invisibility? Not to be ignored, but to be misunderstood while trying your hardest to be real. So you begin to hide. You withdraw not out of weakness, but out of necessity. You retreat into solitude, because it's the only place where your thoughts can breathe. And in that solitude, you discover something powerful, a rich inner world filled with insight, imagination, and clarity. But also, paradoxically, a haunting loneliness. Because what's the value of seeing the truth if no one else is ready for it? What happens when your insight becomes your exile? This is the existential dilemma of the intuitive introvert. You're gifted with vision, but cursed with isolation. You can feel the future, but you're stuck in a present that doesn't make space for prophecy. You care deeply, but you're told to care less. You're sensitive, but you're told to toughen up. And so you end up living in a world that constantly asks you to betray your nature just to belong. And the cost of that betrayal? It's enormous. Because when you suppress your intuition, you lose your compass. When you deny your sensitivity, you lose your soul. And when you silence your inner voice, you begin to forget who you are. Many intuitive introverts develop coping strategies: hyperadaptability, perfectionism, intellectualization. We learn to present versions of ourselves that are more palatable, more digestible. We hide our depth behind humor or silence or competence. But inside, we're starving for connection, for understanding, for a world that sees us as we are, not just what we produce. And here's the paradox: the more we adapt, the more invisible we become. The more we succeed in blending in, the further we drift from the truth we were meant to bring into the world. So let me ask you something that might stop you in your tracks. What have you stopped saying because no one understood you the first time? What truth did you bury because the world wasn't ready to receive it? Carl Jung understood this pain. He lived it. He spoke of the introverted intuitive as someone who lives at the edge of the collective psyche, someone who dreams not just for themselves, but for humanity. But he also warned that this type is often misunderstood, even pathologized, because society doesn't know what to do with visions it can't measure. It doesn't know how to welcome those who speak in symbols, metaphors, and meaning. So it labels them eccentric, dramatic, even unstable. But what if the real instability is a world that refuses to look inward? What if the intuitive introvert isn't broken but prophetic? In the next part, we'll explore why the modern world is so deeply incompatible with the intuitive introvert's nature and how this dissonance creates not just emotional suffering, but a profound existential crisis. Trapped between two worlds, how the modern age silences the intuitive soul. The intuitive introvert stands at a crossroads between two profoundly different realities. On one side, there is the external world, a world driven by speed, productivity, visibility, and noise. On the other, there is the vast internal cosmos, quiet, mysterious, symbolic, and steeped in meaning. And the suffering begins when these two worlds refuse to speak to each other. The modern age, in its obsession with data, surfaces, and immediacy, has no patience for the slow-blooming truths of the inner world. It doesn't wait for insight. It demands output. It doesn't value questions. It wants answers fast, marketable, and unambiguous. But the intuitive soul doesn't function on that clock. It doesn't speak in bullet points or hashtags. It speaks in dreams, in patterns, in symbols that take time to unfold. And when that language is ignored, the intuitive person begins to question whether their deepest truths matter at all. This incompatibility creates a fracture not just in expression but in identity. You start to feel like a stranger in both worlds. In the outer world, you're too abstract, too deep, too sensitive. In the inner world, you're burdened by visions that have no outlet. You carry insights too large for casual conversation, emotions too nuanced for surface-level relationships. And so you begin to live in a kind of liminal space, never fully belonging anywhere. You're not disconnected because you lack social skills or confidence. You're disconnected because the conversations others are having feel like shadows of what you're actually experiencing. You sit in meetings, social events, classrooms, and feel the weight of all that is not being said. You feel the shallowness, the posturing, the avoidance of depth, and the silence inside you grows louder. The modern world does not just misunderstand intuitive introverts, it actively suppresses them. From childhood, we're taught to value extroversion, clarity, and action. Students who speak confidently, even if inaccurately, are rewarded. Those who pause, reflect, and hesitate are often seen as indecisive. But what if that hesitation is wisdom in the making? What if the pause is the sacred space where intuition is forming something true? We are punished for our depth before we even understand its value. And so we adapt. We learn to speak faster than we think. We learn to smile when we're unraveling. We learn to edit ourselves so thoroughly that we forget what our original voice sounded like. But here's where the suffering turns existential. Because when you betray your own mode of being just to survive, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your center. You live from the outside in, constantly mirroring what others expect, and slowly, imperceptibly, your inner compass begins to weaken. You're no longer guided by your own vision, but by the fear of being misunderstood. You stop trusting your intuition and instead rely on logic, trends, and feedback loops. You become a stranger to your own insight. And yet, the inner world never fully disappears. It waits. It watches. It whispers. In moments of stillness, walking alone at dusk, staring out a window, waking from a dream, you feel it return. A symbol, a sensation, an idea that doesn't come from you, but through you. And in that moment you remember, I am not like the others. And that's not a defect, it's a design. But reclaiming that truth in a world that constantly demands your conformity is no small task. It requires courage, not the loud kind, but the quiet, stubborn kind. The kind that says, I will not abandon my nature, even if no one understands it. So let me ask you something that might shake your assumptions. What would you become if you stopped trying to be understood and started trying to be whole? Carl Jung believed that the intuitive introvert has a vital role in the evolution of consciousness. That these individuals are not merely outliers, but necessary carriers of future insight. But to fulfill that role, they must develop not just vision, but voice. And that voice must be reclaimed from the ruins of a world that told them they were too much or not enough. In the next part, we'll explore how intuitive introverts can begin to reclaim their power not by changing who they are, but by stepping fully into the unique wisdom they were born to embody. The visionary's burden, turning isolation into inner authority. There is a moment every intuitive introvert must face, and it feels like standing at the edge of the known world. You've spent years, maybe decades, trying to translate your internal landscape into a language the world can accept. You've minimized your complexity to fit in, diluted your thoughts to match the tempo of surface-level dialogue, and buried your intuitive knowing under layers of logic and likability. But then something shifts. You realize that no matter how much you adapt, the ache remains. The disconnection, the sense of spiritual homelessness, the inner pressure of unexpressed insight, it doesn't go away. And in that moment, you're forced to confront a painful but liberating truth. The world may never understand you fully, and that's not your fault. This is the turning point. The moment when isolation becomes not a sign of failure, but a signal of depth. Because here's the secret that no one tells you: visionaries are always out of sync with their time. The intuitive introvert doesn't live in the same temporal rhythm as others. They live ahead of it. They sense what's coming, what's collapsing, what's being born beneath the noise. And that foresight often feels like madness until the world catches up. But by then, the visionary has already moved on, already mourning the next truth that others haven't yet begun to see. What do you do when your insights alienate you? When your authenticity feels like a liability? You build inner authority. You stop waiting for external permission to be who you are. You stop intellectualizing your intuition through the lens of acceptability. You stop translating yourself into someone else's dialect. And instead, you begin to trust the raw, unfiltered voice that has always spoken from within. That voice is not always easy to hear. It gets drowned out by self-doubt, by cultural conditioning, by the fear of being too much. But it's there. It has always been there. And when you begin to listen, really listen, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel solid again. Inner authority isn't about being right. It's not about becoming untouchable or immune to criticism. It's about grounding your truth so deeply within your own being that misunderstanding no longer unmoors you. You stop needing the world to validate your perspective because you've learned to validate it yourself. You've tested it in solitude, wrestled with it in silence, and emerged not with certainty, but with clarity. And clarity is infinitely more powerful than certainty. Clarity doesn't need to convince. It simply is. To reach this place, though, you must first face the shadow side of your gift. The loneliness, yes, but also the pride, the superiority, the tendency to retreat so far inward that you become disconnected from embodiment, from community, from life itself. Jung warned that the intuitive introvert can become so attuned to the symbolic world that they forget to engage with the physical one. They become watchers instead of participants, prophets instead of people. And that too is a form of exile. So the path is not escape, it's integration. You don't abandon your inner world, but you anchor it in the outer one. You bring your visions into form, not for applause, but for alignment. You write, speak, create, connect not to be seen, but because the truth inside you demands expression. It refuses to be buried any longer. And when you live this way, something wild and beautiful begins to happen. The isolation doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes solitude. And solitude, unlike loneliness, is fertile. It becomes the sacred ground where vision ripens into wisdom, where insight becomes embodiment. Let me ask you something only you can answer. What truth are you carrying that you've never given yourself permission to speak aloud? What knowing have you buried so deeply that even you are afraid to name it? The suffering of the intuitive introvert doesn't end with understanding. It ends with ownership. With a decision to no longer apologize for your depth, your perception, your difference. When you stop negotiating the terms of your expression, when you stop begging the world to make space for your soul, you become something rare, someone who leads not from dominance, but from depth, not from charisma, but from coherence. That is the power of inner authority. And once you find it, you are no longer at the mercy of the world's reflections. You become your own mirror. In the final part, we'll explore how intuitive introverts can channel their suffering into service, how the very qualities that once isolated them can become the source of their greatest impact. The gift of depth, how intuitive introverts can change the world without changing themselves. There is a quiet revolution waiting to happen, and it won't begin with fireworks or headlines. It will begin within the minds and hearts of those who have spent their lives on the edge of things, watching, feeling, sensing what others missed. The intuitive introvert is not here to dominate the world, but to transform it. And the irony is that the very qualities that once made you feel like a misfit, your depth, your sensitivity, your inner knowing, are the exact qualities the world is now starving for. Because in a culture addicted to speed, surface, and spectacle, what's missing is meaning. and meaning is your native language. But let's be clear, the goal isn't to rise above others or to retreat into spiritual superiority. The goal is to embody your insight, to bring it down from the clouds of abstraction and into the soil of daily life. Because what good is vision if it never touches the ground? What good is intuition if it remains locked inside your journal, your mind, your silence? The world doesn't need more noise, but it does need more truth. And your truth, however quiet it may seem, carries the power to shift people not by force, but by resonance. So how do you begin to offer your depth without betraying your nature? You stop trying to be louder and instead become clearer. You don't need to compete with the extroverted world. You need to anchor in your own. Speak when it matters. Write with precision. Create with intention. You don't have to flood the world with your presence. You just have to show up fully when you do. And every time you do, you give others permission to do the same. This is the paradox of the intuitive introvert. You are not here to fit in, but you are here to connect. And connection doesn't mean dilution. It means transmission. You bring the unseen into the seen. You give form to the formless. Whether through language, art, design, healing, listening, or simply being, you carry a frequency that others can feel, even if they can't name it. And that frequency is not about being understood by everyone. It's about being felt by the right ones. The ones who are also searching, also sensing, also waiting for someone to say what they've never had words for. And here's where the transformation happens. When you stop seeing your nature as a problem and start seeing it as a path, everything changes. Your suffering becomes your signal. Your isolation becomes your training ground. You realize that all the times you were misunderstood were not signs of failure, but signs of being ahead. And being ahead is lonely until others catch up. And they will. Because consciousness evolves, and you are part of that evolution. But to play your role, you must commit not to performance, but to presence. Not to pleasing, but to truth. And that commitment will cost you. You might lose relationships built on your silence. You might leave spaces where your dimmed light made others comfortable. You might walk away from opportunities that require you to compromise your essence. But what you gain is unshakable, integrity. And with integrity, your impact becomes inevitable not because you chase it, but because you embody it. So ask yourself one last time, what would your life look like if you stopped trying to change yourself to fit the world and instead changed the world by being fully yourself? Carl Jung believed that the intuitive introvert had the capacity to become a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious world, a translator of the invisible, a messenger of the soul. That is not a light calling. It is a sacred one. And if you feel it burning inside you even faintly, then you already know. Your suffering was never meaningless. It was preparation. Your depth was never a flaw. It was your forge. And now, the world is ready not for noise, but for you. Use your gift. Speak your truth. Live your depth. Not because it's easy, but because it's time.